This presentation of In Their Own Words is brought to you by the Honor Project and is dedicated to the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces. The Wild Weasels were the Air Force's wildest pilots in Vietnam. They flew fighter jets like the F-100, F-105, and F-4 deep into hostile airspace to coax the enemy into opening fire with their surface-to-air missiles. Once the Weasels located the radar site, other fighter bombers were called in to kill it. Paired with an electronic warfare officer, or EWO, the Weasels constantly engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. In 1966, Jerry Hoblit, a 32-year-old Air Force pilot, was one of the first men trained in the ways of the Wild Weasel.
Well, the aircraft versus the surface-to-air missile was a duel. It was Dodge City at high noon. It was similar to other military duels, tank versus tank, fighter aircraft versus fighter aircraft, or even submarine versus submarine in some respects, but in one very important respect, it was different. That is, the adversarial systems were operated in very different environments and used very different technologies and weapons to deal with one another. Therefore, when you're a fighter pilot engaging in another fighter pilot, as a for instance, you can project from your system to his system, and the differences, usually small, will dictate and control your tactics. In the case of the surface-to-air missile versus the aircraft, they were very different. So we had a very complex set of technologies interfacing with tactics that we had to deal with. What was similar to the other duels, however, is that the final result was almost always fatal to one of the two adversaries.
But Hoblit's entree into the Wild Weasel program was not of his choice.
The story of how I got to be a weasel was I had been in Southeast Asia on two different occasions and had been sent back to the United States and was an instructor at Nellis. Knew that the war was still going on and knew that my time would soon come to go back to it. My wife had a baby and I wanted to get the baby born. So as soon as the baby was born, I volunteered to go back to Southeast Asia. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was in charge of making assignments. And he says, "Oh, we have this new program. It's Wild Weasels. I'll give you a job there." I told him, "No, I'm not interested in that. I just want to go back and be a fighter pilot as I've been before, because I knew as a military history that you don't want to try something brand new in war because that's always dangerous, abnormally dangerous, for the simple reason there's no experience to base on." So he said, "Okay." I thought he understood me. That was on Friday. Went up deer hunting. Came back on Monday, and I walked in the squadron, and I was greeted with a lot of hoos and hollers about, "Well, here's our new weasel." I said, "Well, thanks, friend at the Personnel Center."
But with experience, Hoblit soon gained confidence in his skills as a weasel.
Our early missions, of course, were very uncomfortable, but one that sticks in my mind is that there was we dodged many missiles. That was part of the business. But on one occasion, one missile didn't seem to want to be dodged. And no matter what I did, it just seemed like he was coming right at me and seemed to be real determined about it, as though he was alive. The last thing that I did is, when he was close enough in that I could see his canards move, that's the control surfaces on the forward part of the missile, I just yanked for all I had, and he went off under me and turned me over and didn't, well, he put a few dents in the bottom of me, but that's about it. And that made me kind of nervous, because I was wondering how come all at once this one missile seemed to be so much better than the others. The first SAM site that we killed really increased my confidence. Up until that time, I was daily more and more frustrated. But I never got to that moment that I've got it under control. And for the simple reason that I knew that there was a very smart enemy on the other side of the fence who was looking for control. And I knew that it's like a sports game, like a football game. The minute that you think you know how to trap block the guy next to you, he's going to pull, and you're going to get trap blocked yourself. So yes, it was there was a lot of confidence, and I felt a lot better about it after we made our first SAM site kill, but I never got to the point where I thought I had all the answers.
Like most other fighter pilots who wanted to work alone, Hoblit was reluctant to share his plane with his electronic warfare officer, Tom "Bear" Wilson. But their bond proved invaluable to the success of the program.
Well, the air battle always has been very intense, very complex, and very difficult to sort out. This didn't change, particularly in the Wild Weasel business, but it was amplified quite a bit. The fighter pilot's basic problem is that he has too much coming at him. Too much information is coming into his cockpit. What he needs, what his lifeblood is processed information. He has to have the wheat separated from the chaff, and he has to have it done real time, split-second time. That's what Bear Wilson did for me. He kept track of what the enemy was doing from an electronic standpoint, from the surface-to-air missile standpoint. I was keeping track of what the other things were doing, the MiGs, the strike force behind me, and the management of my flight. But he kept me advised of the primary threat, the threat that not only was a threat to us, but the threat that we intended to deal with and make them a negative threat, less of a threat. It took a very special person to be able to look at all the things that he looked at and communicate that to the guy in the front without further loading the guy in the front with information. He had to sort it out, understand what the enemy was doing, anticipate what the enemy was going to do, and communicate that to me in a very minimal fashion. Sometimes he would do that with only inflection of a voice. Even a grunt while we're pulling G's could tell me lots of things. Very few people could do what Bear Wilson did. Only 2 or 3 did it well. And Bear Wilson was unquestionably the best of any of them. Well, on our first combat mission together, at that period of time, I had already had 25 combat missions as a strike pilot on my own. And I thought I kind of knew what was going on. However, I made a couple of poor tactical decisions and got us in a lot of trouble. Got us to where we not only nearly lost our own lives, but lost the lives of other people. This caused us to go back, and we had already studied a lot. We had trained as much as we had time to, but it was obvious that we hadn't done anywhere near enough work, either together or individually. It was also obvious that at this point, our tactics that we were told by the people that preceded us were so undeveloped as to leave us in a lot of trouble. So Tom and I recognized that what we needed to do is to really approach this very carefully, and you didn't have much time to be careful. You're going to fly the next day. But we had to really get into the study mode and really figure out what was going to do, and we had to come up with new ideas and do it quickly and do it very efficiently, because not only was our own lives at risk, but more importantly, we had the very high risk of failing, which is worse to a professional than dying. Bearing in mind that single-engine, single-seat fighter pilots don't care at all about having somebody else in their airplane. And I was not at all sure about that how I was going to go with that. So pretty well I looked around and said, that man looks like he might be acceptable. And so it was kind of a winnowing out of one, and I guess Tom was doing about the same thing. He had heard uncomplimentary but inaccurate things about our arrogance and things like this, and and thought that I was probably the most modest of the group, I suppose.
The Wild Weasels used tactics specifically developed for their unique brand of flying.
Well, the tactics when we arrived were either to get way out ahead of the strike force or to actually accompany and be embedded in the strike force. Neither one of those worked very well. We found that what we needed to be, if you were right embedded in the strike force, you were too late to deal with the SAMs. You were too far out ahead. They dealt with you, then they dealt with the strike force. So what we found, it was an optimum place of about a minute out ahead. That puts you somewhere between 5 and 9 miles out ahead of the strike force. The most effective thing that we came up with was to divide the elements. We do this in air-to-air fighting, called fluid four formation, but in the weasel business it's quite a bit different. We were close to the ground, and we were separated by many miles, way outside visual range, and we couldn't maintain very good radio contact because of so much radio chatter. So we were effectively coordinated by virtue of our pre-briefings and by virtue of our knowledges, but we couldn't do any real-time coordination to speak of. But this put us with the strike force at the target and us ahead of the strike force a little bit and bracketing the target. This really gave the SAMs a tough time. If they engaged one of us, the other guy would get them, or could probably get them. It was a tremendous force multiplier. A couple of our early SAM site kills were directly attributed to this tactic. In one case, the SAM engaged the other element, my other element, when I was the lead, and fired at him. And he fired, and I happened to be on what we call a base leg. That's right where you roll in from altitude at your target. When he fired, I just looked over the side of my cockpit, and there, hidden in the jungle, was all the smoke and corruption that occurs after a missile launch, and I had not to do but just to roll in and kill him. And this happened on something nearly like that happened on yet another occasion. Our equipment gave us a lot of information about the enemy radar. One of the best things it gave us the direction. We knew exactly which direction he was from us. But what it did not give us in anywhere near refined enough form was how far away from us he was. So therefore, we couldn't tell exactly where he was. And he was very, very good at camouflage, and he moved frequently, almost every day. So we couldn't pre-plan a mission after him. But by getting him to launch a missile, now there's a lot of stuff that happens when a missile launches. There's a lot of commotion and smoke and dust on the ground. Now he's exposed his position. So we had to get him to shoot at somebody, and we were the guys that chosen to be shot at. Obviously, it would be preferred not to draw enemy fire before you attack him, but we were pretty well constrained to that. In order to attack him, we had to draw his fire first. And then the tactic was dictated by that set of circumstances. It was put him at 10 or 2 o'clock, where you can best watch him out the front of your airplane, and watch the missile. Don't do much until the missile is close on board. And when the close on board, we made a in-game maneuver to cause the missile to miss. And now we're controlling the situation. We know where he is. He has to reload. We have lethal ordnance. We have a wingman with even more lethal ordnance, and we're going to deal with him. That's the only way it could be done with the technology. Later technologies give you distance, but you still are going to have to make that final pinpoint location of him. So maybe we're going to be stuck with that for a while. I'm not sure how the guys that are practitioners of the weasel business now are doing it. But that was the only way we could do it. Certainly not the way of choice, but it was a way that worked and that's what we did.
"29-year-old Tom Bear Wilson was Jerry Hoblit's electronic warfare officer, or EWO. Wilson explains the evolution of the tactic of attacking a surface-to-air missile site.
I believe it's because of our client, and our client was the fighter pilot dropping bombs. And in every war since World War I, the primary losses have been on the head of the dive-bombing fighter pilot. Our job was to protect him. When Jerry and I got to Takli, Thailand, their loss rate was 63% that they would not complete their 100 missions. And it's a pretty spectacular and good mission to try to stop that. And we did that 2 different ways. The first was on a temporary basis, an immediate basis for that mission. In other words, we would fire our Shrike anti-radiation missiles, try to keep them off the air, and have immediate results. The second and more lasting mission was for tomorrow's air crews. And for that one, you actually had to dive bomb and destroy the surface-to-air missile site. In doing that, we shared the same probable losses that the strike crews did, but I think the specialness was that our job was there to protect probably the bravest men in the world. We used an electronically equipped airplane with an electronic warfare officer such as myself in the back seat, and we went in to locate the surface-to-air missile site. And then on our wing, we had dive bombing airplanes, F-105s again, and they would do the actual destruction. Actually, at a point not far down the road, we carried destructive capability too. We carried CBUs, cluster bomblet units, and the wingman carried his hard bombs. And between us, we'd did a number on the site when we'd catch it. But finding them was just very difficult. To find the site, you had to see it. The North Vietnamese were masters of camouflage, and the world was green over there. They hid their sites very well, and they also had dummies set up openly so you could attack the wrong site. So we had to know where it was, and to find it, the only way you could find it was to have him launch missiles. You could very successfully get him to launch his missiles at you if he flew up high, throttled back a little, and presented a great target, which is what we did. Once he launched missiles at you, we may have another site launch at you. But all this while, Jerry had to keep his eyes on the site. And all the while he was dodging the missile and everything, he had to keep his eyes on the smoke from the site, keep it in view, and then we would do our dive bomb maneuver. And it was extremely difficult to do all the execution phases and then to successfully hit the site. But we did that. All of the F-105 airplanes and F-4 airplanes over there had radar warning receivers. And they would point toward the radar of the different kinds of radar. It might be a AAA directing radar or a surface-to-air missile directing radar. And the length of the strobe would tell you the proximity, and it made a noise, which would identify what type of radar it was. All of the airplanes had that. But the special airplanes, and the ones that they ran out of, kept running out of, and we ferried airplanes over to replace them, were the Wild Weasel airplanes. In the back seat, we had all the standard equipment, but we also had a panoramic scope. Now this panoramic scope, I could see the entire spectrum on a frequency scale. In other words, every signal that's out there. And I had another function. I could actually stop and time my signal with the surface-to-air missile operator's signal. I could see where he was looking in the airspace. I could see if he's looking over here, or whatever. And I could also, by looking at the level, see his interest in us. I'd tell Jerry, okay, this one, he just had that small receiver up in front. But I could say, isolate just that one and say, this guy's serious. He's about to shoot at us. And so our equipment was very special, and we didn't have that many of these airplanes, these especially equipped airplanes. So when we lost them, it was a great panic. We couldn't perform the Wild Weasel mission, which was as I said, those two, immediate mission and the strategic mission. And so we had to replace them. And that's what Jerry and I did in October of 1966. We were one of the 7 crews that ferried new airplanes over because they'd run out completely. People like Mike Gilroy that you talked to were waiting there without airplanes. And so we pulled in, and the first thing we noticed is they had a wonderful airplane with this wonderful capability, and we had an incredibly sophisticated enemy, much more sophisticated than we thought, in North Vietnam. And yet there were no tactics on how to employ the Wild Weasel against the surface-to-air missile site. And the only thing that they said at that time, and Jerry will get into this, was that we should fly 20 miles out in front of the strike force, and because that was the length, the distance, the range of the missile, and engage them, and protect them during the time of the strike. Well, how? How do you find that spot on the ground? How do you do these things? We didn't know how to do this. A couple of guys over there, Leo Thorsness was already there, Harry Johnson, his backseater, Mike Gilroy, Merle Detlefson, Glenn Davis. Glenn Davis probably taught us more than any other individual, and Mike Gilroy. And they taught us how to survive and the basics, but no one had tactics. So I think the first thing Jerry and I did together, I flew there my first day over there because the guy didn't have a backseater, and he said, I need one, and I went up and flew. I was still tired from the flight over. But the first time Jerry and I got to lead, they were trying to teach us how to lead. And it was a PAC-6 mission, and that's downtown Hanoi. And we were going to go out to protect the force and had no bloody idea of what we were doing. So we drew our route out in front of the force, and we went to a place called Yen Bay, which was a crossing point for the Red River. And we didn't know that you should avoid Yen Bay. But as we approached, we had these 3 other airplanes out here, relying on us and all our astuteness. And there was an undercast, a very heavy undercast, and they launched missiles. I picked it all up and everything, fine, they launched. And the other thing is, we'd been told that these looked like great big telephone poles. Well, this missile is going Mach 3.5, if you can imagine it, 3.5 times the speed of sound. We're going about 3/4 the speed of sound, or around the speed of sound. So closure is well over Mach 4. That gives you an idea how fast this thing, it's a blur. It's just a blur. And we can't see the ground. Jerry couldn't see it to dodge it. So the first thing we're looking and we're yammering. The rest of the force very astutely turned around and said, heck with you guys, and went back across the red and waited for us, knowing what would happen. I assumed they'd been there a while. The SAM came darting out of the clouds, blew up just beneath us. And by the way, all the sound effects you hear on television and movies, this boom, there's no boom. High explosives go crack, just like that. And it's a great, huge orange explosion with black shooting out the top and the bottom, and that's all shrapnel and deadly stuff. And it just knocked our airplane upside down. So we're sort of feeling ourselves and everything and saying, are we still alive? Are we still here? We were alive. And I said, I'm okay finally, or something like that, probably in a very high pitch voice. And Jerry said, I'm okay. We went back across the river, picked up all those guys, and went on to the target. Now, it's a terrible weather day, and the target was a place called Tai Nguyen. This is before he got famous. The mission commander on the mission, Gene was his name, was a lieutenant colonel, sort that says, damn, the SAM's full speed ahead. And he caught a SAM in his cockpit right over the target. Jerry and I went back to Tok Lee. He doesn't like to talk about it, and I don't like to talk about it. But we considered that first mission an utter failure. We had done everything wrong. We started studying day and night. That's all we did was study. Jerry, who was a weapons school instructor, Top Gun school instructor, started coming up with tactics, and he studied the weapons we carried just incessantly. He memorized all these tables and everything. I memorized our equipment and the enemy SAM. I can today tell you about the length and the burn time and everything of every one of those weapon systems. And it never happened again. From that point on, we knew where to go, and we got better and better to the point that we used to say we would drop leaflets on Moscow if they wanted us to. The airplane was magical, told us everything that was happening in the air, and we were capable after a while. But you've got to remember, our job was protecting the bravest and most honorable men that we had ever known. And that made the mission a lot easier. But the F-4 and the F-105 fighter pilots were tremendously brave.
Understandably, the Wild Weasels sometimes felt like nothing more than sitting ducks.
Our normal area was Hanoi. We were flying near Haiphong. Now, the Navy did not have Wild Weasels. They used EA-6Bs, which is a different concept. They used jamming and launch strikes only. In other words, they just had the do-it-now protection. So we always expected, when we went over there, a lot of SAM activity, lots of guns, and that sort of thing. In our area, they were afraid we'd pounce on them and kill them. Over there, they didn't do that sort of thing. So we were going toward Haiphong, just south of Haiphong, and looking at a site there, and the site came up, fired at us, and they all fire in threes, so we had 3 missiles coming at us. We knew about those. By that time, we'd been there 40 or 50 missions, and we knew what we were doing. And then Jerry turned, and he was after that site, and another site fired at us. So, okay, that's 6 missiles in the air after us. That's okay, we're still concentrating on that first guy. And then I announced a third site fired at us. And so we had 9 missiles in the air, this one point in time, at our little rosy buddies. Our wingman and the rest of the flight just kind of pulled back, and here we were facing all these SAMs. And Jerry astutely dodged the first one. And normally, if you dodge the first SAM, the other 2 will go by you on that cubby. And then reversed or whatever he did. But anyway, all 9 SAMs were going by the wayside when he was in the pop delivering weapons. There's a camera that comes on when you release your weapons, and it's a 70-millimeter camera, and it goes from fore to aft, and it picked up 3 more missiles coming in from the rear. So we had 12 missiles in the air at that one moment in time after our butts.
Despite the training and the state-of-the-art equipment, the Wild Weasels did a lot of learning while on the job. The special radar jamming gear used by the Weasels sometimes outpaced their own battle tactics.
The one thing that we were not able to do in North Vietnam with the Wild Weasels was have a SAM rollback. That is, take out the strike guys, let them off for a few days, and put the SAM killers to work, just knocking back the SAMs. We did that with the MiGs. We had MiG days where the guys would go after the MiGs and try to wipe them all out, keep the threat down. But we couldn't do that with the Wild Weasel. In fact, once we asked for permission to do that, and we were told in a response that, yes, you're right, it's a valuable resource, therefore the only place you can fly is in Pac 6. That's like a death warrant. Therefore, I was a writer. Even in the Air Force, I could write. I went to Europe next, and in the war plans there, I was able to include a rollback of the surface-to-air missiles and the creation of sterile corridors into the strike zones, and that was precisely what we did during Desert Storm. The other thing was I was able to push through a tactics manual that included both the fighter pilot, the weapons officer, like Jerry was, and the electronic warfare officer, like I was, into a tactics shop, weapons and tactics. So my ability to write really helped me change some of the inequities that we had seen over there. And not just myself, of course. I mean, there were a lot of people that were upset and mad and angry and said, we want realistic training, we want all these, and we got it. And very glad we did. The equipment was ahead of its time, just like you say. It took some CIA gear and fooled around with it and made something that was much beyond what they'd even anticipated. I've been able to work on all of the equipment since then, and the digital does-it-for-you stuff that the state of the art today is no quicker. It allows you to do everything hands-free, and you depend completely on the machine, but it prioritizes and does everything. I wouldn't trust a machine to do that. I enjoyed the old analog system because it was instantaneous with another thing. But we had all that capability, and the Air Force was still, when we applied it, they were still in a World War II mentality. Bombers went in great streams, one after the other. Turned, and made a huge target. Well, they didn't have SAMs back in the Second World War, and SAMs just chewed up the B-52s. Our fighters, it was the same thing. We had this Wild Weasel and this great capability. During Desert Storm, by the way, the guys would not fly unless there was they call them the Wild Weasel police in the air. Our guys at Talk Lee wouldn't fly unless they had a Wild Weasel protecting them. It was a very dangerous mission. Some of the guys let off at about 80 missions, I assume, looking to go home. I don't remember us doing that. I do know our last 5 missions were very easy. 96, 7, 8, 9, were very easy. They gave them to us in the less threat areas. I don't think we asked for them. In fact, we enjoyed being the ones picked for the real hairy missions. We were young, and if you think you're going to get shot down, you're going to get shot down.
In 1966, on his 7th mission as a Wild Weasel electronic warfare officer, Mike Gilroy was shot down.
On about our 7th mission, Ed Larson and I were tasked to go up to protect a strike force on the Northeast Railway. And the Northeast Railway is a main rail line that goes from Hanoi up into China. It is an extremely heavily defended area because that was one of the main sources of their supplies for MiGs, interceptors, surface-to-air missiles, ammunition, food, and everything else. We were in a flight of 2 aircraft, which was sort of an unusual configuration. We were, of course, the lead aircraft, and we had a single seat with Captain Pete Pittman flying the number 2 aircraft. We took off from Talk Lee early in the morning, probably about an hour before daylight. I'd say probably something about 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Flew directly across to the water across the southern part of North Vietnam, and then headed on north. Got a refueling tanker up there, and then headed on into the target area. This was our first mission up into the high threat area. We had some missions down in closer to the demilitarized zone, which were really not very good weasel missions because there weren't any radars there. So this was the first time we were really up against a lot of radars and a lot of defenses. The weather was terrible. It was towering cumulus clouds, thunderstorms, thunderclouds, and then a haze below that, so your visibility was really pretty poor. A month later, we wouldn't have flown in that mission. We would have known better. We would have known to be a little more cautious, to hold ourselves back a little further. But as I said, it was our 6th mission. We didn't know a lot as to what the limits were, so we just pressed on in. We had one of the surface-to-air missile sites, radars came on the air. I called it out to Ed Larson. I said, we got a SAM at 2 o'clock. So that means it's 2 o'clock to the airplane. Ed said, okay, I'll turn towards it. Ed turned towards it. The signal got stronger and stronger. And that was one of the things our missile only went about 7 miles, and theirs went about 19 miles. So you had 12 miles you had to negotiate there, that you were within his range before you got within your range, the range of your weaponry. So we headed on in there, and it looked like the signal was strong enough, so Ed said, okay, I'm going to shoot now. So he pulled up the nose and fired the Shrike missile off. And it went on in, and the signal went off the air. So we had hit it. The Shrike missile had hit the radar site. So I called, I said, well, the next one's at 12 o'clock, so he turned, or at 10 o'clock, so he turned to the left and lined up on the second one. And we were trying to get close enough to fire at that particular site, and in the site fired at us. And I called, I said, launch, Ed. I said, they've launched at us. He said, okay. So what we had, our tactic then was to light the afterburner, to get the nose of the aircraft down, to put the radar signal off somewhere in the front of you between your 10 o'clock position and your 2 o'clock position so that you could see it coming at you. We knew that much. So the missiles, I said, have you got it in sight, Ed? He said, yeah, I got the first one in sight, because you can see the missiles. They have a big ball of fire coming behind them, but they come quite fast. And so Ed successfully dodged the first 2 missiles. And then the third missile came at us, but it came right out of the cloud bank. We were right up against this cloud bank, and the missile was right there. It seemed right in front of the aircraft and blew, and a tremendous explosion just pitched the aircraft probably about 5 or 6 feet up in the air. And then the cockpit was full of black smoke, and all I could see through the smoke were there were 2 fire warning lights right in front of you, right at eye level, and they were glowing, said fire. And could hardly breathe because the missile had hit the front of the aircraft and blown up the ammunition drum for our 20 millimeter cannon. So all that cordite was coming back in the cockpit. And I was really, I thought, well, this is a pretty serious situation here. And I couldn't breathe. I was, because of all the cordite smoke back there, I just, I was almost asphyxiated. There was a handle in the back here that you could pull to jettison your canopy. And I tried to find the handle, and I had only had probably a dozen missions in the airplane, so I knew where it was, but I couldn't reach back and put my hand on it. So I reached back and couldn't find the handle, and I was just about on my last gasp. I thought, I'm going to die here, and I thought, well, I'd rather die, take my chance in the parachute. So I gave up trying to find the handle, and I rotated the ejection seat handles, and that also blows the canopy. But I had every intention of getting out of the airplane, because I knew if I didn't get out, I was going to die there. So I rotated the ejection seat handles, and the canopy blew, and the fire blew out. Just like that, just that rush of air blew the fire out. And as it so happened, Ed Larson blew his canopy at exactly the same time. So the combination of both canopies going at the same time blew the fire out. And in order to eject, once you raise the handles to blow the canopy off, that arms the seat, and then a trigger falls down. So you have to open your hand again and grab the trigger and squeeze them. And I had every intention of doing that, and my hands were open to get around the trigger, and I thought, no, let's think about this a minute. So I just waited right there, and it was beautiful. The smoke was all gone, the fire was out. There's a patch of blue sky over here. Things weren't near as stressful as they had been 15 seconds before, not being able to breathe. Of course, we were in an open cockpit airplane going about 400 miles an hour, so you had to sort of sit sort of straight up. I called Ed on the command. There's a command position on the interphone box that boosts the volume, and I said, Ed, are you there? And he says, yeah, I'm here. And I think he said something bright like, Mike, are you there? I said I had to rotate the ejection seat handles to blow my canopy off. And he said, me too, because he couldn't find the handle either. He had been trying to do exactly the same thing I had been doing. So I didn't feel very bad, because Ed probably had 2,000 hours in the airplane, versus my 40. So I didn't feel too bad that, I couldn't find the handle.
With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, So all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to crushing your goals. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
So we headed out towards the water. We were probably 10 miles southwest of Hanoi at that time. We headed out towards the water. We had lost our wingman when we were doing all the dodging the missiles, so we were by ourselves, lost in that he wasn't with us. So we headed out. I looked out at the left wing. There's a big hole in the left wing, front of the left wing about like that. The top of the tail was gone. Front of the aircraft was gone, but it was still moving along pretty well. We flew over, heading directly to the water because that was the closest place to get rescued, and flew over a place called Camp Pha, which was, there were iron mines there, but there was also a North Vietnamese gunnery school there. And as we were coming up there, there was a big burst of 85 millimeter flak, and it comes up in bursts, circular bursts, about maybe 100 yards behind us. And I called Ed. I said, Ed, they're shooting at us. And he says, yeah, I see. And the next burst was about 50 yards behind us. And the next burst was right under the aircraft with anti-aircraft artillery. And it too raised the aircraft up with a big jolt. And just then our wingman joined up. Pete Pittman had been trying to find us, and he joined up with about maybe a 60 or 70 or 100 knot overtake speed. So he slid under us and off to the right, maybe a couple hundred yards, and they started shooting at him. They started tracking him. I guess they figured they already had us. They were going to get the second aircraft. So just him doing that allowed us the time to get across the coast and out into out over the water. And then the controls went out. The 85 millimeter that had hit us had severed the hydraulic lines, so there was no more hydraulic lines, and the aircraft went into a left bank heading up towards Red China. So Ed said, well, it's time for us to get out. And I said, okay. I said, we'll see you in the water. And I ejected, and then about 2 seconds later he ejected and wound up under the canopy. You eject from the aircraft, and then there's a thing that kicks you out of the seat, and then your canopy automatically opens up. And everything was going well, and I was very calm and very cool, and I really congratulating myself on how calm and cool and collected I was, that I was taking care of the situation. No problem too great. I handle this. You have a survival kit that's attached to your seat. I pull the handle to release the survival kit. It falls down in a cord below you with the survival kit, and then a raft below that. And I was going to throw the handle away, and I thought, no, I'm going to save that for a souvenir, So I unzipped my G-suit pocket and put that in there and saved it. And I was really thinking I was John Wayne. I was Joe Cool. I just handled everything well. I've got that ejection seat handle bronzed. It's on my wall at home. But then I was trying to remember everything that I had been taught in survival school on how to land in the water. And I thought, yes, okay, let's see. I've got my survival kit down below me. It's about 10 feet below you on a nylon cord. And then about 10 feet below that is your one-man dinghy, your life raft. And I was going over in my mind everything that I had to do. I took out my survival radio and listened to it, because you had a radio on guard channel 243.0, so you could hear all the communications that the the other airplanes were making. And they were, our wingman was calling the rescue people in to get us, and it seemed like everything was going on, and tried to talk to them, but it was, I don't think they ever heard me because I never got a response back. So I put my radio away and reviewed the things that I had to do to land in the water. And there's a procedure for landing in water so you don't drown yourself under the canopy. And the first thing is that your raft hits the water, and that sort of acts like an anchor. And then you turn your face into the wind, you turn your parachute around your face into the wind and release the catches here so you can jettison your canopy. And then when your feet hit the water, you're supposed to pull the catches down so that the canopy blows away from you, the wind carries it away. And so all that sequence happened. My raft hit the water, I turned into the wind, I released the catches, my feet hit the water, I released the canopy, and the canopy blows away. And then for the second time that day, I'm about to run out of air again because I had forgotten to inflate my Mae West, and so I was down there, probably sinking with all this weight on me in the South China Sea, and trying to find the toggles for my Mae West, and I couldn't find them. They're just two little plastic knobs here, and I couldn't find the things. And I thought, boy, what a stupid way to die. And just then, in front of my face comes a nylon cord, which has me attached to the raft. So I said, okay, so I pull myself up the nylon cord, get in the raft, and really criticize myself. I thought, you dummy, you were so calm and cool and remembering everything, and you forgot to inflate your Mae West. So anyway, I sat in the raft, got the radio out. I heard Ed talking, so we both knew we were in the water okay. He was probably about half a mile away in the water. I opened my survival kit because everything is supposed to be in there that you need. There's supposed to be a fishing line, rations, canned water, shark repellent, signal flares. And I opened the kit up, and the only thing that was in there were black wool socks. Someone had gone through and stolen the things out of the survival kit on the base. So anyway, so I pitched that overboard. I had no use at that time, for black wool socks. Sat there in the raft contemplating how I had remember reading that the South China Sea had the largest concentration of poisonous sea snakes in the world, and lots of sharks, and sat there, very low profile in my raft. We had a ship coming out of the harbor towards us. We were right out off Haiphong Harbor. There was some discussion on the guard channel from the rescue airplane, so one of them went in and dropped some bombs, not close to it because that was against the law, but just jettisoned some bombs maybe a mile in front of it. So the ship turned around and went back in. We got some mortar fire off some islands that we were close to, and we're in the water about an hour and a half. Then there were some Navy airplanes coming after us, and there was an HU-16, a Grumman Albatross, an old 2-engine Grumman Albatross coming from the Air Force. I didn't know that at the time, but we knew some Air Force people were coming. So anyway, after about an hour and a half, the HU-16 lands. It picks up Ed, and I hear him on the radio. Says, "Well, I don't see the other one." So I lit off a flare, some green smoke, and they said, "Okay, we see the smoke." So they came over there, and it was really strange because I did something very irrational at the time. The airplane came up, and it had no markings on it, and I thought, I don't know if this is an Air Force airplane or a North Vietnamese airplane or a Chinese airplane or what, which was really probably not too rational because I'd just been listening to him talk on the radio. And into the door of the airplane is an Oriental in a wetsuit. So I thought, I'm going to pull my pistol just in case. So I pull my pistol out, and the guy says, "Don't shoot, I'm Hawaiian." So I put my pistol back, and he jumps in the water, and they come out and tow the raft up and got me in there. And I expected a lot of sympathy and congratulations, and they just looked at me and said, "Oh, you forgot to deploy your Mae West, didn't you?" So I got no sympathy from them. We had a hard time taking off. The airplane had one sick engine, so and the prevailing wind was offshore, so they had to take off towards land. So we made 3 attempts there. The airplane was being shot at in all 3 attempts, and finally got into the air. you know, an HU-16 is a joy to behold. It sort of gets off the ground, off the water by bouncing on it, you know. I mean, you bounce and you go a little bit in the air and then you bounce again. And of course, every time you come down, every rivet screams and stretches, and it's an amazing thing. I have the greatest respect for rescue people. They took us back to Da Nang, which was in South Vietnam, and went to the flight surgeon, and they checked us over, and I had hurt my back, but not too badly. It was sore, but it actually was hurt worse than I thought, because I didn't have a compression fracture. But Ed Larson had a very bad compression fracture, and that happens when the ejection seat hits you at the force of 18 Gs. So it does a real job on your back if you don't have it lined up perfectly. So Ed Larson was sent back to Clark, to the hospital there, and then eventually back to the States. And I went back to Cockley the next day, and they asked me then what I wanted to do, and I said, well, I'd like to take 30 days off and go visit my family. So I went back and 30-day leave, because we had no more airplanes. So that gave them time to get some new aircraft in there. So it was interesting. It gave me a little bragging rights around the stag bar with the other weasels. Not something I'd recommend for everybody, but you know, it was an exciting time.
Pilot Bill Sparks flew nearly 150 missions as a Wild Weasel. Sparks credits his personal philosophy of flying with saving his life during the Vietnam conflict. Once he had ejected, Sparks looked for a safe place to land.
As with most things that happen in tactical aviation, decisions are made long before the fact if they're going to work. So everyone has to come up with personal philosophy. What the hell? Philosophies are personal. I had decided a long time before that if on fire, jump on the biggest piece going my way and ride it as far as I can, because the people that made me catch on fire didn't like me. And why would I want to go join them? Because, you know, we're not going to have tea and crumpets. This is not going to have fun. They probably don't have any ice, no scotch, no nothing, no peanuts for the party, right? So I want to get as far away from them as I can, because they're mad at me. They have a reason to be mad at me. I just shot at them. I dropped a bomb on them. And all that. I can understand. I'd be mad at me too. So, in fact, one of the people that I respect as much as anybody ever saw, it had a PhD in astrophysics and a master's in aero, and had been in a manned orbital laboratory program, Mo Baker. Mo Baker and I got in this monumental argument in the bar one night over what to do if you're on fire. And he kept saying, you know, the engineering thing was if on fire, eject. He said, you know, the explosion could hurt you. And I said, man, the guys on the ground are going to hurt you. So we had this enormous thing. Well, it wound up that Mo got hit and got blown out of the airplane and wound up in jail with compound femurs and torture for a very long time, and did not enjoy himself at all. This was in July or August, I've forgotten which, of 1967. Well, later on, I got hit, and I'm burning like stink. And I did what I could do, because the airplane lasted longer, and I stood with it. Now, you say, are you afraid? You don't have time to be afraid. You're afraid later. Okay, put yourself in an automobile, okay, and it's icy. And you're driving along with 4 lanes of traffic going your way, and some fool in front of you taps the brake, it starts to spin, and everybody around you starts doing wild gyrations, and you steer through the middle of it and come out the other end. Are you afraid? Not till you stop. Then you get the whips and jangles, okay? You're allowed to get the whips and jangles when it's over, okay? So when you're in an airplane, you're too busy to be afraid. When you're in an engagement, you're too busy to be afraid. If you're afraid, you're not going to make it. And it isn't, bravery doesn't have anything to do with it. I don't know brave people. I don't think I ever met one. Well, yeah, Carlo, my backseater, the bravest man that ever lived on the face of the earth. He flew with me, for goodness sakes, and just incredible. But you don't have time for that. So what I thought while I was in there was, this isn't any fun. One of the silly thing is, here I am, I'm coming out, that I have had to blow the canopy because the cockpit's full of smoke, and I couldn't see, and I was reaching up, my gauges, my instruments were all gone, they weren't working. So I was trying to wave the smoke from in front of the whiskey compass, right? little magnetic compass. That's the same thing that basically they crossed the Atlantic with in 1492, right? And I thought, if my hand gets up there, it'll blow off. I was going 690 knots. I'm trying to wave the smoke away from in front of the whiskey compass. Later on, I thought, man, the rudder pedal burned off. How am I going to put the brakes on when I stop this dude? Because they're on the brake pedals. What do you mean you're going to stop it? This thing ain't going anywhere. It's going to jump out of it. But it's all training. It's all the way you get your mind working. Emergencies, everybody flies an airplane. You do emergency procedures, and you work and you work and you work and you work on emergency procedures so that when you get in an emergency, you've been there before, whether you've been there before or not. And it is not it is not terra incognita. You know what's there, and you handle it. I was in a Hanoi area, okay? It's flatter than a tabletop, wall-to-wall rice paddies, wall-to-wall people. There were something on the order of 500 to 750,000 people with rifles laying down in the rice paddy shooting straight up at us when we flew over there. There were 9,000 37 millimeter and larger guns. There were about 4,000 or 5,000 automatic weapons that were the equivalent of 30 to 50 calibers. There are 18 SAM sites. There's a whole bunch of MiGs, and there's everybody and his dog wears a uniform, and they're all mad at me. Now, it doesn't take a real monumental intelligence to realize you don't want to go down there where they are because they're not going to like you. They're going to beat snot out of you if they get a chance. So you go as far away as you can. Well, it just so happened that I got exactly as far away as I had to get, which is luck, okay? And I would far better be lucky than be smart or good. And it worked. So I got over the Red River, and then rode the airplane for a little bit, by the way, to get over the river after I lost control of it. Why? Because I wasn't where I wanted to be yet. It was still going my way. It's not, this is just do whatever you need to do, right? What you ever got to do. Popped out, slipped the chute. Once I got it open, I did biggest front riser slip I could do. Got my knee in the clevis and slipped it 4.5 miles and slipped into what I thought was elephant grass. Elephant grass is about 15-foot tall grass, right? And it wasn't elephant grass. It was 75-foot tall bamboo. So I went smoking down through the bamboo and busted myself up some and managed to crawl out of the bamboo and get a little hole underneath. The only place I could see the sky was underneath this enormous teak tree. The helicopter put 135 foot of string out, and they were chopping the top out of the tree with the rotor blades when the jungle penetrator hit the ground. And I got on it and went up a string. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life.
But ultimately, Sparks believes it was the innovation and the commitment of the pilots and the EWOs that made the Wild Weasels so successful.
Wild Weasel program was put together by extremely dedicated people on a shoestring in a hurry. It was not a Department of Defense initiative that started off, we will now do this. And all these wonderful people with flashy stars on their shoulders and the rest of it really had very little to do with it. It was a grassroots thing because we were in a hurry and we didn't have time to run it through, which is probably one of the reasons it worked so well. After Vietnam was over, the people who had been in the program really worked hard to get a better system, and that system was the F4G. A lot of people worked on that very hard. We had a lot of support from some very senior folks who had been there and had flown, and we needed better. What we had in the backseat of the 105 was better than what we had in the backseat of the F100, but not appreciably better. What we had in the backseat of the F4C was not as good as what we had in the F105. So when we got the G model, what they had to do first of all was to take brand new airplanes, strip all the wiring out of them and start over from scratch because there was so much stray voltage running around in the F4s that it was exciting the antennas and you'd self-jam yourself. So they started with that. The mods were rather enormous to take those E models and turn them into Gs. The systems themselves, a lot of EWOs just killed themselves to make sure that we had this capability to see what was out there. The first time I ever got to crawl up in a back seat of an F4G and look around and then go over and do the simulator, do the back seat simulator, I would, I remember looking up at I've forgotten who was taking me through. It was one of the old Ewos. I've forgotten exactly who it was now. And I looked at him and I said, I would have sold my kids into slavery for this capability. So we had enormous capability. Lots of people busted their clock. Lots of very fine middle-ranking officers sacrificed their careers to make it happen. And when we went to the Gulf, we had a lot of good things happening for us in the Gulf. Not the least of them was Chuck Horner, he was a weasel. We went through weasel school together. And when we got over to the Gulf, we had damn near every weasel that we owned show up over there. And Horner was assured that we could do it right. So to do it right means, first of all, you want to take out their ability to see and talk to each other. So that's a weasel job, right? So the day before hostilities started, bombing started, there were 1,000 and something, I don't know how many, something between 1,005 and 1,010 radars. 3 days later, there were 4. And we did it right. And the kids went out with the new missiles, the HARMs, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, and several orders of magnitude better than anything I ever saw, with gear, with detection capabilities. There were several orders of magnitude better than anything I ever got a chance to play with. They were wonderfully trained. They had a tradition that they were going to uphold one way or the other. They still were first in and last out. And incredibly dedicated young men who really, 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 really wanted to do right. I was inordinately proud of them. And did it work? By the second or third week, Horner had tankers operating within 20 miles of Baghdad. And you don't put 100,000 pounds of gas in a tin can floating around unless you own the air. Now, you just flat don't do that. We owned it. We owned it. We owned it totally. And if they wanted it, they had to rent it.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of In Their Own Words. This program was created and produced by First Person Productions in association with the Documentary Broadcasting Company. The stories told herein were supplied by the Honor Project. Produced by David Benson. Content written and produced by Dave Barsky. Engineered by Greg Bartheld and Brian Donovan. Narrated by Bill Ratner. This production is copywritten by First Person Productions, Incorporated. Any unauthorized broadcast, public performance, or copying is a violation of applicable laws.
Hello, this is Gary Chahot welcoming you to check out the French History Podcast. Our main show covers the history of France from the first humans until present. If you liked Mike Duncan's The History of Rome and wanted a similar program covering the land of beauty, culture, and love, we are exactly that. We also host world-renowned scholars who have delivered guest episodes on their specialties, including 18th century pirates, revolutionary booksellers in 20th century Paris, the special friendship between the Marquis de Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson, and numerous others. Learn what you love and listen to the French History Podcast today.